Hello, everyone. I'm Maria DeSimone. Welcome to the Insightful Astrology podcast. This is the second official YouTube version of the podcast, and I am super excited to bring this show back to you because it is a podcast that has always been very near and dear to my heart because I get to bring astrology to life for you and I get to talk to you unplugged Maria. And that's my guests as well. Unplugged. I mean, we are as real as it gets in the metaphysical community, talking to you about all spiritual topics, not just astrology, but of course it is astrology centered because, that's what we do. But I have a great show for you today. And I have not only an amazing astrologer as my guest, but he is one of my favorite people in the world. I know I say this about everybody, but I really mean it. And one of my dear friends and an astrologer who I truly respect and admire because he knows his shit. Okay. He's earned his stripes. So let me introduce you to Lars. Lars Mellis is an amazing astrologer based out of Los Angeles, right? Los Angeles. And he is part of the NCGR, the National Council for Geocosmic Research. He is on the national board. He is very active in the astrological community, and he is very well trained in astrology. And I am going to talk to Lars today about the solar return chart. We're going to bring that to life for you, help you understand what it means, how it is useful in predictive analysis. And together, we're just going to have a really great conversation. So Lars, welcome. I'm so happy to see you.
Thank you so much. You're also one of my favorite people as well, by the way. Like, this is so exciting. We keep it real. I may be living in LA, but I was born in the Bronx, raised right outside the Bronx. So it's going to be a real conversation for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Like that's the one thing that excites me about doing this podcast is that we get to just talk shit. We get to keep it real and make astrology accessible, but also keep the reverence and the respect for our craft, which hopefully we do, because we talk all New Yorkie, but we are very much filled with nothing but respect and love for our astrology.
Of course. We're studied, we're certified, and we really want to sort of bring it to life for the people.
Yeah, and you are a Sag moon baby like me, but you're even more. You Sagittarius sun. You've got like a whole ton there.
I have a giant stellium. Sag sun, moon, Mercury, Mars, midheaven.
So I'm going to brag about Sagittarius now. One of my teachers, Noel Till, who has passed away, he taught me that the etymology of the word Sagittarius is wisdom. And he taught me that everybody who has core placements in Sagittarius literally has their hand on the Akashic Book of Records, the Book of Wisdom. And that is why, I don't know if you can see that painting there. It's so dark and very, 8th house Scorpio-ish. But Carol Devine, who is an astrologer that also painted, years ago, I commissioned her to paint an astrological rendition of my birth chart. And what she used to do is take somebody's birth chart. She no longer does this, so don't try to hire her. She's retired. Unfortunately, this is a relic. And so she takes your birth chart and she says, okay, well, I'm seeing this and this is Maria's essence and I'm putting it into a painting. And the reason why that is me kneeling in a grotto and spirit is handing me the book of wisdom is because of my moon Neptune North Node conjunction in Sagittarius in the 8th house. That is how she explains it to me. So that long-winded, total transgression of what we're supposed to be talking about today is to bring home to all of you that hopefully you can appreciate that there is actually some real wisdom that's going to come out of our mouths, and it might not be us personally, it might be divinely inspired, I don't know, but you definitely have that wisdom, and that's one of the reasons why I love you, and I love having authentic conversations with you, because I could really get deep talking about astrology with you.
We've gotten deep. We've spent several hours over dinner talking, so I'm really excited for this.
You, me, pasta, and astrology. Nothing is better. Seriously.
Totally agree.
So tell everybody a little bit about you and your website and how they can connect with you.
For sure. Yeah. My books are actually open, so this is really great. You can find me at larsstars.com. I love a rhyme. So that's my new website. You can find out about my offerings. I call myself the Al Roker of astrology. I'm like a weatherman, essentially. So I will tell you the forecast, like very in detail, but it's up to you to wear a jacket, right? That's how I use astrology as a tool, essentially. So I really empower my clients essentially to make their own decisions with the weather report that I give them. If it's going to rain, figure out the right jacket to wear, that sort of thing.
And you're not going to lie to them. If it's going to rain, it's going to rain.
Right, absolutely. But I think what's really important is providing the weather forecast in a constructive way, right?
Yeah.
And we as astrologers can really empower our clients through that. And that's part of the reason why I love this topic of solar returns, because it really is like a map for the year, which is so cool.
It absolutely is. So that is the perfect segue into what we're supposed to be talking about today, because
Oh, right.
we could easily get into 12 different side conversations. So we're going to talk about the solar return chart, which is a 1 year theme chart that symbolizes energetic influences that are at play for you over the next year. Now, can be used as a standalone predictive technique. However, most astrologers do use it in tandem with other predictive techniques. For me personally, I call it the cherry on top of my predictive ice cream sundae. That is always how I've treated the solar return chart, and that's always what I've called it, because what I do is I look at it last. After I've analyzed someone's transits, progressions, solar arcs for the year, we've already talked about the main themes, and then invariably that solar return chart will corroborate everything that was just said. And that's why I like to call it the cherry on top of the predictive ice cream sundae. So I'm curious to know how you use the solar return chart in your practice.
Like literally 1000%, I would argue the same way. You know how influential you've been in my career. And you were, I believe, the first person to really introduce solar returns to me, and then went down the rabbit hole with it. And I absolutely save it for last when it comes to my consultation. So we're going to be doing secondary progressions. We're going to be doing analyzing just basic transits and the eclipses. And then, of course, the solar return chart is an amazing way to corroborate everything, and then also further elucidate the themes that we talked about.
Yeah, for sure. So looking at those solar return charts, guys, so worth it. If you don't know how to do it yourself, consult your astrologer as part of your predictive update every year. And for students of astrology, I am going to show you my favorite solar return books really quickly. So the OG solar return book, the first one that I ever got, is by Mary Shea. And so she is classic for solar returns. It's Planets in Solar Returns. Now, she is a legend in the field. This is an older book, and I don't mean that it's not valid, but in terms of the rest of the books I'm going to show you, this is like more of an original book as far as modern astrology goes, modern astrology use of the solar return chart, but definitely worth having. And so I learned a lot about how to even read a solar return chart from her and from Celeste Teal, who is my other main influence when I was learning about the planetary returns in general. And her book, Predicting Events with Astrology, covers not just the solar return, but all planetary returns. This book is out of print and really hard to get. Last time I tried to share it with students. They were telling me it was like hundreds of dollars. So this one may be hard to get, but love it. It's a great book. Now recently, in the past year and a half to 2 years, there have been other influences for me with the solar return, which have changed my my view of the chart and tweaked my technique, I guess, a little bit. And one of them, and I mean, she is the queen, I think, of solar returns currently, is Lynn Bell. Now, Lynn Bell has just republished this book about a year ago, maybe 9 months ago. It's called Cycles of Light, Exploring the Mysteries of the Solar Return. This book was out of print for a long time. And she did a workshop on solar returns, her techniques, through astrologyuniversity.com about a year ago. And it was so popular that this book got reprinted. So it's now back to the public. And I took her workshop. I don't know if it's still available there. Probably just go check it out if you're interested. But I took her workshop and I got her book, and that helped to influence me even more with my analysis with solar returns. The last book, which admittedly has been on my bookshelf, and it's been one of those books that I'm like, I'm too dumb for this book. I'm so too dumb for this book. Like, when you buy those books that are just
I've been there.
above you and you're like, I know that someday I'm going to understand this and I'll appreciate the wisdom, but not there yet. Well, I'm happy to say that I think I can finally appreciate the wisdom of this book because, I mean, the woman that wrote this book is a legend in astrology, period. Okay. This woman knows her stuff. She is Lee Lehman, and she wrote this book on classical solar returns, which is a very, I think, underrated book in the solar return world. However, she actually did the most comprehensive historical overview of the solar return part in astrology history that I've ever seen. Like she really does a thorough treatment on that. So she actually talks about Lynn Bell and Celestial and Mary Shea and everybody else and how all the solar return charts became what they are. And then she takes you back and does it old school with traditional astrology. And so you, my friend Lars, are trained in traditional astrology. So tell us a little bit about that.
In regards to my traditional background with astrology?
Yeah, because you said Lee Lehman was actually one of your teachers, and you've had some nice conversations about traditional techniques where you're blowing my mind, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, so I am certified from the School for Traditional Astrology, which was taught by Wade Caves. Lee Lehman also taught some courses in addition to Deb Holding. And the three of them, of course, are real, you know, I would say like they're real masters when it comes to traditional astrology, hence why they're the three professors of that school. If you're interested in traditional astrology, it's an amazing place to go and learn for sure. And I'm certified in Hori astrology specifically, which is a different topic, but nonetheless, you learn very applicable techniques to being able to do general chart interpretation for sure.
Goals, okay? You know this. Hori astrology has always been out of reach for me, but I'm getting there slowly but surely. And you inspire me. And you're going to come back and do a show, I think, on Hori astrology. I think you'd be perfect.
Would love to do that for sure. Yeah.
So we'll circle back to that topic for sure. And so it's really interesting because back when I first learned astrology, all I knew existed was modern astrology. I didn't even fully comprehend that astrology was divided in different segments of time until I took the Hellenistic astrology class, which I had just graduated from Chris Brennan's class. Now, Hellenistic astrology and traditional astrology are related but different because it was first the Babylonians, Mesopotamians, then the Hellenistic era, and then the Renaissance medieval era, which is what you've studied. Am I correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the foundation is similar, but there are very nuanced techniques that are different that and it's all amazing. I'm telling you, it's not that one is better than the other. They are all so mind-blowing and worth studying, but it takes a lifetime to go down that path. And so I've studied modern astrology and I thought, oh yeah, that's it. And then I realized, oh no, we got to go back. We got to go way back. And so that's what I'm doing now and integrating that with modern techniques because modern astrology is only a few hundred years old. Most people don't even realize that astrology as you and I practice it today, the current astrology, you know, I hate to say this, but pop astrology, which dilutes it, is, you know, modern astrology to some extent, but then people get confused and take it off on a different level and it becomes like bullshit pop astrology, which is like, no, just don't do that. But modern astrology absolutely has its place in psychological application for the birth chart, and the strength is there for psychological application. But traditional astrology, what you've studied, what you've mastered, and what I'm now involved in more is nothing compares for predictive techniques. Okay, nothing.
100%.
And so going back to the solar return chart, let's get into that. And you just did a whole article, I think you said, on for NCGR on this. So I'm going to
take it published in the journal. Yeah, it was really exciting.
Talk to me, babes. What do you got?
Well, I think first of all, just in case there are people who want the 101 on it, maybe we should just like define what a solar return chart is. I'm assuming most people know, and also it's in the name, but nonetheless, essentially when the sun returns to the exact degree and minute of the place where it was in your natal chart. A chart is cast at that moment, essentially. And that chart is the solar return chart that we're talking about. And that is the cherry on the sundae when it comes to predictive techniques. I view it kind of like a map for the year. I feel like the sun is also a cartographer, essentially, and it really provides us with that map for a year. It's interesting you bring up traditional versus modern as well, since I'd love to talk with you about this, and maybe we're going to argue, who knows, but
No, we're not. I am in your camp now, I think, but
love
go
it.
ahead. Go ahead.
Because, you know, the Britney versus Christina-esque rivalry with solar returns is where to cast the chart, right? Like, do you cast it to the natal location? Do you cast it to the, like, where you're celebrating the birthday that year location? Like, it's the relocational versus the natal, essentially. And astrologers get heated over this topic. I have gotten into some strong conversations with other individuals, and like, good for people for being so passionate, right? I'm here to say that unequivocally, you should be casting it to the natal location and
I
not
love it.
relocational.
Now I want you to explain why, but I'm going to tell you, I used to, because the original training was, you know, these ladies.
Mm-hmm.
So these ladies are telling you to use the current location. So
Right.
for many years, I used the current location, and I didn't question it.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you do as you're told, kind of a thing. I was like, all
Totally.
right, they know better than me. I'll do as I'm told. And recently, having taken Lynn's course and the way she explains it, and then Lee's book, and uh, just uh, experimenting, I will say that, okay, I know I'm going to be a little mutable here, so forgive me. I in my last planetary returns workshop with my students, we did both, especially for the people who were born in different countries and then were very far apart. So for major life events like a year of marriage or a big milestone, I said, you know what, for shits and giggles, we're doing both. We're going to do current location and we're going to do birth location. And we compared the solar return charts. And as long as you're skilled in analyzing data, you're going to see the same event. It's just shown in a different way. So I'm not going to say that it's wrong, horrible to do the current location. What I will say is that you're wasting your time if you're going to be one of those people who's like, I got to travel to Alaska for my solar return because that's going to be the best chart. Or, oh my God, I can't go to Italy because my solar return chart will suck this year. I'm like, no. But I'm actually going to let you explain, because I feel like you're going to be able to do it better than me, as to why energetically the natal location should be the default for solar returns. And I have just recently changed my practice to do this.
For sure. Well, I also want to validate anyone who uses the relocated chart as well, because that chart would apply to city limits. So essentially, from an energetic perspective, if you think about your birth chart, that is tied to your natal location. So the solar return is tied to your natal chart, which inherently, therefore, links the two and links that natal location. So in my opinion, your natal chart is like an internal compass that you take everywhere with you. That internal compass, the data is set to the longitude and latitude of where you were born at the end of the day. So casting a solar return to the natal location basically applies everywhere, right? Now, that doesn't mean there isn't validity in also looking at your solar return chart for where you celebrated your birthday, especially if you're in where you live currently. Like, for example, most of the times I'm celebrating my birthday in Los Angeles, where I spent about 80% of my time, right? So that solar return chart would be tied to the relocated data. So it basically applies to city limits. It doesn't mean that it's invalid, but when I leave Los Angeles, the only solar return chart that would apply would be to the natal location, because that one is ubiquitous, versus where you celebrated your birthday, it applies to that city as well, but it's like so tertiary that, in my opinion, I really only take a look at the core chart at play here, which would be the core longitude and latitude, which is the natal location.
That is very beautifully explained. And to use another analogy, language. Okay, so I'm of Italian descent, and if you're born in Italy years ago, depending on the place in Italy that you were born, there's the Italian language, but then there are hundreds of dialects. Okay, so the language is universal, and there's a proper language. that proper language that fits everywhere in Italy, no matter what, would be likened to your cosmic DNA and your birth location and your birth chart. However, if I then go to Naples, which is where my family's from, they speak Napolitan, which is a dialect that only the people in Naples understand. And it works and it fits and everybody can communicate in Napolitan when you're in Naples. But then you go to Rome and nobody understands Napolitan, but everybody understands Italian, the language of proper Italian. So that's another way of looking at why the birth location always works, always fits. But to your point about the city limits idea, which I love, I think it fits beautifully in that way. And only recently, see, this is, we're always growing as astrologers. For years, I used current location, because that's what I was taught. I didn't question it. But the more I learned about it, especially that point that you just made, it was like, you know what? That makes sense. Duh. And I started to do it that way. And for me, I didn't travel far from my birth location. So it never really mattered for me. But so many of my clients have a different experience. So having said that, what else with your amazing article, what other points in the solar return chart do you have to share with us now that we've defined it?
So I think how to work with it, right? That's I think why people probably are tuning in is like, okay, well, I can create my chart using software, but how do I actually work with it? And like, where do I start? And I would, of course, you start with the sun in a solar return chart. When I delineate a natal chart, I a lot of the time start with the ascendant and the chart ruler. But when it comes to a solar return chart, we're going to first take a look at, whose special chart it is, and it's the sun. And you want to take a look at condition and aspects, first of all. And by condition, I mean, what house is it in? Because that will influence sort of the relative strength or how much is highlighted in that chart per se. If it's in an angular house, which would be 1, 4, 7, 10, that is it is a very highlighted sun. If it's in one of the other houses, whether cadent or succedent, like it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. We don't use the good bad binary in astrology by any means, but we do need to interpret it in a different way. So pay attention to the house and the house themes first and foremost, and then what aspects are being formed with the sun, right? Are they harsh squares and oppositions? Are they trines and sextiles? What are we dealing with here from a Ptolemaic aspect perspective?
Okay, so that's looking at it first as a standalone chart. Attack the sun first. I'm just recapping. Attack the sun, house placements, and aspects to the sun.
Correct. Yes.
So that's like the first steps in analysis.
The first thing I'm going to do is look at that. And you do allude to something that you absolutely have to do with a solar return chart, which is overlap it with the natal chart. That is super important to see where the placements in the solar return chart fall on the natal chart, specifically paying attention to if placements fall onto angles in the natal chart. It is hard to understate, and I think people lose sight of angles a lot because they're not planets, and we're so focused on the planets or whatever, the placements. Like angles are so acutely felt that placements for the solar return chart on the angles are very much highlighted points of the year. So if you had the moon in the solar return chart that was on the ascendant of your natal chart, it is a lunar year at the end of the day. You have that moon on your natal ascendant. Would be one example of it. So the second thing I would do is also overlap the two.
When you overlap, you're looking at angularity. Any solar return planets hit an angle on a birth chart, and then I guess secondarily you would be looking to see, do any of those solar return planets make a conjunction to a natal planet?
100%, definitely, since that of course has influence as well in regards to the expression of this year for sure.
Yeah, it for sure colors it. And it's so funny. I ream into my students' heads in the first class that I teach, the beginners class, that angles are everything, because angles are the point of energy manifestation. And so you're echoing that. And the cross of matter, and now exact or close to exact birth time is essential for this. So if you're 4 minutes off in your birth time, you're a little bit off in terms of degree. But if you know that your birth time is pretty much on point within a minute or two, let's say, then you can really rely on those angles for accuracy. And and energetically, remember, this is in the internal resonance of the planetary energies, but it's coming out physically when planets are on an angle. So that's a great point about planets being on an angle in the solar return chart to the natal. And what do you think about planets in the standalone solar return chart that are angular? Do you give them the same weight?
There's definitely weight analyzing the solar return chart itself for sure. If the sun is on an angle, especially, but I would definitely not discredit or disregard any angular planet in that solar return chart, because that definitely has influence in the year itself. My question though would be, when you overlap it with the natal chart, where does it fall? Like, what house does it fall in? Are there any conjunctions with angles or placements as well? I think that definitely needs to be answered in understanding really the scope of its influence.
So that would be your second series of steps. And then what would be next for you?
Timing, right? We want to use it for timing. So with the standalone solar return chart, will first of all take a look at where the eclipses are falling in that chart, and are there conjunctions with the eclipses, because if an eclipse is going to hit a solar return placement, that's definitely going to be acutely felt in a big part of the year when it comes to timing. Traditional transits, especially, I have found with my clients and myself, Mars is really, really influential. Of course, as you know, Mars traditionally is viewed as a divider or a severer, right? It severs, it breaks apart. And that's not necessarily a negative, because we sometimes need that in order to usher in what's new. But taking a look at where Mars transits through the solar return chart, what conjunctions it makes with placements, and then what houses those planets might rule, could really give a lot of insight into where there might be a lot of kinetic energy. Mars is also very activating at the end of the day too. And this applies to every transit, but as you know, there's a lot of planets that move really slow. They're real slow. It's the 101 at 4 p.m. If you live in Los Angeles. So you're not going to really be able to gauge much from that. I would say Jupiter and faster, you're going to probably really be able to see the story in regards to transits, but everything applies.
Yeah, and I remember last year over one of our dinners, I think we analyzed each other's solar return charts, and you were on point for everything you said for me, without a doubt. And I remember specifically the timing of it and bringing up the eclipses. And so we were playing and we were doing that. We're like, well, when this eclipse happens, then this should be activated. And sure enough, it is on point, especially when it's within a couple of degrees, those eclipses.
Yeah, for sure. The tighter the conjunction, the more it will be felt, for sure.
Yeah. Before we move on with the predictive part, I actually want to go back to the analysis of the chart itself for a minute, because there's a couple of more points that I tend to look at, and I was curious if you look at it too. So after the sun and analyzing all the aspects and the angularity, I like to really focus on the chart ruler for the standalone solar return chart, and Lee Lehman talks about this heavily in the traditional theory. So I know you do it, but we may have glossed over it. So the chart ruler for the solar return year, where it's placed, it has almost as much importance as the sun in the weight of the solar return chart. And sometimes it can dominate depending on if that's angular instead of the sun, let's say for the year or something like that. So that placement, the aspects that the ruler of the chart is making, and then the other thing that I'll look at are, well, are there any important, let's say, is there a big stellium? Is there a new moon or a full moon in the solar return year? That's really an important turning point. So little nuanced details like that. So anything else that you want to add about just the natal analysis before we go back to the predictive?
Thank you so much for the chart ruler, right? Like, it's called a chart ruler for a reason. And that it of course has a ton of influence. And in my article, I go into a little more detail. So if you're a member of NCGR or you join NCGR and you can get that journal, of course we'll provide more context around that. But aspects to the chart ruler influences the whole chart at the end of the day. Also, like the condition of the chart ruler itself. I'm a big believer that like I said, there's no good, bad binary in astrology. So my interpretation of dignity in regards to planets being in detriment or planets being in domicile is not a good or a bad thing. I love my Venus in Scorpio natally. I don't view that as a weakness of mine by any means, right? Even though traditionally, if you see what's written about Venus in Scorpio is pretty ugly. I'm not gonna lie. It's offensive at the end of the day. So taking a look just at the dignity and the nature of the chart ruler itself, I think will provide a little more color, but making sure that you're not ascribing morality to it either, right? You need to be objective about it, and you need to also be able to unlock whatever potential there is. If it comes across slightly more what would be viewed as debilitated, but in my opinion is just like, it's kind of in another country, it's in a foreign land, kind of it may be a little more uncomfortable, but that's going to really unlock a lot within you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is one of the areas where it's not that we disagree, but we see it through a different lens, I think. And I think the reason why we see it in a different lens is our age difference. I think it's a generational difference, because you younger astrologers it's very important to you to have that, I guess the sense of agency of, I have Venus in Scorpio. That doesn't mean it sucks. Doesn't mean it's bad, kind of thing. Like, and I get that and I respect it. And you make great points. And I tend to see it, and it might just be because I'm an old lady now. But I have Venus in Aries. I have Mars in Cancer. I have I have some messed up, debilitated planets too, and I objectively see the deficits. In my life history, and that might be because I've lived a longer life, maybe, so I have more experience with how the deficits have come out. And I don't mean deficits to me as a person. So that's the difference. Like, it's not an attack on a person that, oh, you have Venus in Scorpio, you're terrible. No, it's having that Venus in Scorpio or Venus in Aries is likely to set you up for a set of life experiences and circumstances that are inherently more challenging than somebody who has Venus in Taurus or Venus in Libra. And that is what colors our unique life experiences. But it isn't a good or bad thing, and it isn't something to be afraid of. It's actually something that, if you think of it in a proper way, you can learn how to embrace it and turn it into your superpower. So these debilitated planets can become your superpower, just like people who've got squares and oppositions and T-squares or grand crosses. They're really difficult patterns, but they can be turned into your superpower, because how is a diamond made? Enough pressure applied to charcoal. So Venus in Scorpio, Venus in Aries, eventually we'll get to the diamond of it. So I hope I'm babbling, but I hope I'm making sense, because I want to present both perspectives, because they're both so valid. And this is a very big controversy in the astrological.
Another rising.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. And it also like ties back to just interpreting the solar return chart. I remember taking a look at my solar return chart for this year, and there were a ton of oppositions to the sun. There was the sun is in a cadent house. We're dealing with the ruler of the 10th and the 8th. We're dealing with a lot of things that come across as harsh, or there's a lot of tension and pressure. And I will admit, this has been a tenuous year thus far, but I'm really unlocking, and I'm being forced to level up in a way that if it was just a lazy river kind of year, I would just be coasting, right? And it speaks to, when you look at your solar return chart, not being afraid if there's like a grand cross or, a lot of these aspects that can scare us at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. So for predicting, and the other thing about looking at a solar return chart, Lynn Bell talks about this extensively in her book. She really treats the moon as a very significant placement in the solar return chart, and she talks about it by element, and she talks about the pattern, this unique pattern that your solar return charts will spend several years with the moon being the element of fire, and then it'll go to air or earth or what. And so go to her book or take her workshop for more information on that. But I just started to look into that. It was last year, literally, because I just learned about it last year. So that's something that I'm going to start to track more also. And I do find it interesting energetically when you notice, well, is your solar return chart, are you in a series of years where that moon is in fire signs versus, water signs or earth signs, and how is that reflected energetically in your life? So that's just something else I wanted to bring up. The aspects to the moon can also be very important in the solar return chart because of that emphasis of, I guess, emotional focus and emotional energy, since the moon is looked at as the physical body also. So maybe it has that effect on us energetically. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want you to continue all of your points in your article. And by the way, go to geocosmic.org for anybody who wants to join the NCGR. It is a national, international organization, actually, and you can go to that website and then from there locate your state or country's chapter and join. And then you'll have access to things like the journal, which publishes amazing articles and research projects from astrologers, like the one on the solar return that is currently featured. That is out. Is it out now or is it coming out?
Yeah,
I gotta get on that because I'm a member. So I gotta read it. So, but you're here to tell us all about it. So go ahead. What else is in this?
First of all, love that you brought that up because paying attention to that elemental shift is, in my opinion, in a similar vein to when the progressed moon shifts after its 2.5 years, right? Like there is this element of the moon was in all three of the same element, and then it's shifting. Like for me this year, we did have that shift. I have Earth now for the next couple of years, and I'm very interested in seeing how that colors my next 3 years versus the fire that I was dealing with before that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'm in fire now, but going into Earth, you would imagine that it has you more grounded, security conscious, focused on the tangible world, right? All of that. And that just started for you this year.
It did.
And sure enough, I mean, I won't, it's your business, but I can totally see how that fits.
We're going through some career shifts, to say the least, right? And we're going through we're grappling with security, and it's the moon in Taurus, right? That's the moon that I have this year, and it's really figuring about how security orientation affects where I go with my career, right? And so it's such a Taurus moon kind of year. You absolutely hit the nail on the head with paying attention to that moon for sure.
And did we track the degree of that moon and the eclipses in Taurus? Did any of them coincide with those shifts that you've been experiencing?
Actually, not as much, but what I will say is that the moon rules the 10th house in the chart, which is in Cancer nonetheless, but there are Ptolemaic aspects that get formed to that midheaven throughout the year. So there's still that interplay for sure.
All right, awesome. So what other points do you have about the solar return chart? Because after we lay it all out, I'm going to do one of my favorite things about solar returns is looking at a solar return chart when the year is basically done and you can validate. And then you're about to have a new one. And so I am about to celebrate a new solar return May 8th. So I'm almost finished with my current solar return and I can validate everything you predicted last year for me now.
I would really love to do that. I actually don't have many other points. The thing that I love about the solar return is like with everything in astrology, there are so many layers to it, but you can get the general sense of what the chart is sort of preaching or providing you with just using the techniques that we've provided.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's more definitely than what we've said, but I think we've covered the main points of how to approach a solar return chart. And everybody watching this, if you're a student of astrology or an astrologer, you should be able to then cast your solar return chart or for your friends or clients or whoever and get meaningful information, whether you're doing it as a standalone technique or if you're doing it the way that we do as that cherry on top of the predictive ice cream sundae. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and show you guys. I mean, I'm always public with my birth chart. I'm going to quickly show you my birth chart and then show you the current solar return chart, just so that you have a frame of reference for how that fits into my birth charts, because I can't keep going back and forth. But I think it is just really fun to look at your solar return chart after the year is almost over, because after the year is almost over, you can really see how it came to life. And the other thing I would recommend for people who are studying the solar return chart in their own life is go back to those years where major things happened. You had a child, you relocated, big career milestone, big educational milestone, health crisis, marriage, divorce, whatever, and look at the solar return chart for that year, and you can really learn from that. So this is my birth chart. This is the birth time on my birth certificate. I know you're a Regiomontanus guy. I'm still married to Placidus. However, now it's interesting because now that I have a little bit of experience with the Hellenistic techniques, I can 1000% see how the whole sign house system works just as well as Placidus. And the am I saying Regiomontanus the right way?
You are,
yeah. So and I did my chart in Regiomontanus before just to see the little differences, and it's very slight, and so I'm sure the Regiomontanus works just as effectively. So as far as house systems go, I really think it comes down to the skill of the astrologer using the tool, and they all work, and there are pros and cons to all of them. Having said that, depending on the technique that the astrologer is using, there are more appropriate house systems to use. So what I have learned is that if I am going to look at somebody's annual perfections or do zodiacal releasing, I will switch to whole sign for that.
of course.
I also have looked at my solar return chart in whole sign, and I'm still experimenting with that because next year's solar return chart is quite different if I use whole sign. So I'm going to play around with that and see. But I know you use Regiomontanus for everything, right? Is that something that you feel strongly about explaining, or should we bypass it? I don't.
I think how this very much come down to like it's different lenses to the same issue. Regiomontanus is just, my primary teachers when I was coming up was using it. And it's also when you cast a Hori chart, use Regiomontanus. So it just vibes with me. I've used Placidus before. I love Placidus. I've looked at my chart in whole sign, and I have to say all my cadence stuff turns angular. So, if anything, I like looking at my chart from that lens. It's very empowering. So whatever floats your boat.
Whatever floats your boat. All right. But you should know why you're using a house system.
Of course.
So now all of us, myself included, tend to start with the house system that our primary astrology teacher used. Okay. And that's why I use Placidus, because my first astrology teacher used Placidus. And so I didn't question it. And then all of my astrology teachers, actually, when I was learning modern techniques, all used Placidus. So I not only learned how to work with Placidus, but I learned how to become a skilled astrologer using Placidus. And because I can accurately use Placidus in my client work, that is the reason why I continue to use it when I'm using the main modern techniques. But I definitely see the value in Regiomontanus. Armand Diaz uses coke. We were talking last night. He's going to be my next guest. So, he says what his joke is, everything's better on coke or something like that. It's a joke. He says nobody's doing drugs here. But there's a place for all these house systems. Anyway, having said that, you're looking at Placidus. And so the sun is in Taurus. Obviously, my birthday's in May. And so that's, natally, it's in the first house. We'll focus on that sun placement when we look at the solar return chart that just passed. And very quickly, just, take a quick glance at the chart. You see that I have an angular Uranus on my descendant. That says something. I have an angular Mars on my fourth house cusp, which is also my chart ruler. That says something. I won't get into all the delineation. I just wanted you to, with your eyes, be able to see the birth chart so that when you look at the solar return chart, there's a little more context. Mm-hmm. So now, I don't know why that strange wheel came up first, but now we're going to look at the solar return chart that my friend Lars so graciously analyzed for me over, I don't know, rigatoni or something last year. one of our dinners, baked clams, who knows? And it's definitely something that I could validate. So, do you want to recap what you would have said to me and what you saw, and then I can be the client and validate?
Totally. And you're going to have to help me out with this because I'm so focused on the eclipses of this year that I have, my mind is mush a bit, but obviously you can take a look that the ascendant descendant axis is in the sign of the eclipses. And I do believe that one of the eclipses was at about 15 Taurus or 15 Scorpio, one or the other. Correct me if I'm wrong.
The one coming up on May 5th is at 15 Scorpio, right before my new solar return.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah. Gotcha. And then last year, weren't there eclipses that hit this like seventh house angle or the placements itself?
Yeah, something one on my sun. There was one on the node. Yeah, there definitely were eclipses.
There were eclipses, just like we talked about the importance of angles and the fact that multiple eclipses were really within orb of that descendant. There's just a big shift in even how you navigate life when it comes to approaching partnership potentially. Like, remember that the descendant, yes, it's that partnership angle, but it also has to do with how, like, it has to do with the cerebral side of that as well, like what we think about partnership, what our priorities are when it comes to partnership. In my opinion, one-on-one intimate relationships also come into play here. So we're dealing with collaborations as well in a one-on-one context, as I will use the 7th house for that as well. So I believe from what I remember, there was some significant eclipse activity right over there. And how did that manifest for you?
Well, so we always look at, well, is the sun angular? And it's angular this year. So we know that that sun is really loud, and the solar return year will be an important one. The sun is conjunct Uranus, which is also angular this year, and Uranus is natally on my descendant. So there's an echo. That's another thing you want to look at. When the solar return chart mimics something that's in the natal chart, it's waking that up in the solar return year. And so Uranus and the sun are conjunct on my descendant along with the North Node there. But that means that all year long, I was having a transit. Transiting Uranus was conjunct my sun all year. Okay, so that was happening, and it's showing in the solar return chart. So as far as relationships, and then we just, to recap, you want to look at the aspects. There is a square with Saturn there, and there is a tight sextile to Mars. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I'm, those are like the important aspects, but I'm just to show the students what we would be looking at if this was a client. Sun is angular, it's conjunct Uranus on the angle, Uranus is natally there, and the aspects are square to Saturn, sextile to Mars besides that conjunction. So
right. The sun rules an house as well. Very important to know that the sun rules an angular house too.
Thank you. We forgot to talk about that rulership dynamics. That's right. You want to integrate rulership dynamics. And so in the solar return year, the sun rules the 10th house because Leo's on the cusp there. In my natal chart, the sun is in the 1st, but it rules the 5th house of children and romance. So basically, true to Sun Uranus 7th house fashion, I ended up having a year that was dominated by a very unconventional romantic relationship. And so I'm not going to get into the specifics of the person to protect his identity, but it ended up being a very Uranian situation, very unusual. This is somebody who I've known for a very long time, and we basically were in a non-committed connection that became very powerful and intensified all year long. And at the different eclipse points, it's basically it just intensified. However, there is no commitment. And ironically, because I have Uranus conjunct my sun right now, the loyal, steadfast, boring Taurus in me has shifted a little bit. And it's a temporary shift, most likely, because it's due to the Uranus transit, but it's waking up something that's natally connected to my house of relationship, which is to be okay with the non-traditional type of relationship. And so it's basically woken me up. It's been a lot of fun. It's been something that I accept for what it is and have learned not to try to make it into something that it won't be. And that's been the whole dynamic as far as the 7th house energy. But this person actually used to be someone I was in a committed relationship with. So that's where the 7th house becomes a little bit more important. We actually had a committed relationship, and then we kind of reunited, but we're not going to get back together, at least as far as I can see, realistically, in a committed relationship way again. But I thought it was so interesting that really did intensify over this past year during the solar return. And I do think that eclipse coming up on May 5th might be like a grand finale of what's been going on between us. Okay, so that's in process right now. Okay, so the square to Saturn, here's how this came out. Now, Saturn's angular, and I was born with Saturn in Cancer, close to the fourth house cusp, not as close as Mars, but that Sun square Saturn, the interesting way that that came out was a lot of major happy developments happened this year for my children in my family life, but it caused me a little bit of stress and tension in the beginning because my daughter, who is my younger child, very unexpectedly over last summer announced that she was moving out and moving in with her boyfriend. And I then had to very unexpectedly deal with this empty nest syndrome that they talk about, which was a lot harder on me and a lot more of an adjustment than I anticipated. And that became the Saturn, that became the square, because the sun does rule my fifth house natally. And so children ended up being brought into this, and it's home and family change that most people would see as, oh, liberation. And I thought it was going to be liberation, but it ended up feeling heavy, a lot heavier, and a very big adjustment getting used to not having my daughter in my space because she lived with me for 21 years of my life. And all of a sudden she now doesn't. Having said that, there's also both benefics in the fifth house of this solar return chart. So that can alert us to, well, something really great is happening in the topic of fifth house for Maria this year. And what ended up happening is my daughter moved out and she got engaged. So we're planning a wedding right now, and it happened so fast. Boom, 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 all coinciding with the Uranus sun hits and the eclipses, by the way. It was all connected. And you can see that with the aspects. So then the last thing is that the chart ruler, so the ruler of the chart is Mars, if you're using traditional techniques, because Scorpio is ruled by Mars. Mars is in really good shape for the solar return year, which says Maria is going to have a lot of vitality. Sun is sextile Mars almost exact. So it was great sexual energy, great physical vitality. I lost about 17 pounds over the past year, and that's also part of the Uranus transit. Like really interesting. So the home and family changes ultimately, and it ended up working out and being fine. Mars is sextile the sun, but it was an adjustment. And there was that loss, Mars conjunct Neptune in the fourth house. So there was that disappearance of that feeling of loss and bewilderment that comes with a change. And again, Mars is the chart ruler for the solar return year. So that conjunction came out with me losing my daughter in the living space situation. And the last thing that I'll say that is that the moon became quite significant for the solar return year. So the moon is in Leo. I'm in a fire sign series. That moon, when you put it against my natal, is exactly conjunct my fifth house cusp in the natal, bringing more of fifth house topics of sex and children and creativity. But the moon is placed in the ninth house for the solar return year. And this year, Lars, I took in the 1 year period of the solar return, I started, completed, tested, and got certified in Hellenistic astrology.
Incredible.
Moon in the ninth house. So there you have it. Hopefully I brought that to life in a way that everybody can clearly understand. And we're just looking at it standalone. So does that make sense?
I love that. The other thing that I would love to call out, you talked about how that Mars sextile was so beneficial. Mars also rules your sixth house, right? And you talked about the getting in shape and the having that energy when it comes to your routine and stuff. Love to hear that. And as everyone is aware, Saturn does rule things like barren and restriction. So Saturn being in conjunct that fourth house cusp, and then all of a sudden your house kind of becoming an empty nest, absolutely applies, especially given its tie to the sun, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, great point. Very good point. So it's cool because this solar return is basically a baked potato in another couple of weeks. It's done. And it's all been brought to life. And so that's the value of looking at an old solar return. And then I'll be celebrating the new solar return. It's probably going to look different if you cast it in Reggio Montanus. It's definitely different in whole sign because all of the Taurus planets actually go into the fourth house if you're looking at it in whole sign. So I am going to experiment with this next solar return year and really objectively see, well, Is it coming out in third house and fourth house topics equally? Is one dominant? So that's kind of interesting. But I know this is like totally on the fly, but I'm still in the fire series with the moons. But the moon is actually the same as my natal moon placement, and it's conjunct my natal north node in this solar return year. So that is probably going to be significant. Saturn becomes the chart ruler with Aquarius rising, and the only aspects that Saturn's making, it's the nice trine to Venus, and Venus is there at the Aries point. I don't know if you work with the Aries points at all. Saturn's also sextile the node. That's pretty tight, so I'll include that. So that actually is good. Lee talks about how the condition of the chart ruler in any one solar return year actually can key you in to matters of health, can key you into matters of, is this going to be a disastrous year? Is it going to be a generally good year? So a quick look at the condition of your ascendant, in addition to the condition of the sun, is really all you need to know to decide, well, is it going to be a good year or is it going to be a little trouble? And so the ruler of the chart's in great shape. The sun is still conjunct Uranus. I got another year of that. But Jupiter is on my natal ascendant in the solar return, because my natal ascendant is 24 and change. I don't know what orb you use. What orb do you use, Lars?
Honestly, I feel like an orb depends on the planet itself, and the slower the planet, the wider the orb, personally.
Right.
So I give Jupiter about actually like 6 to 8, to be honest with you.
It's definitely conjunct the ascendant. And Venus is conjunct my natal Saturn, actually, because my natal Saturn is just under 2 degrees. So there are 3 exact conjunctions, almost exact. The moon north node, Jupiter ascendant, Venus Saturn. Those are little things that you want to pick up on and look and play around with when you're analyzing your solar return charts. So I mean, I don't want to go into like a full analysis of this. I just want to point out what you would attack and techniques, because remember, this year hasn't happened yet. This is not even born yet. It will happen. And it's basically, how do you treat retrogrades in a solar return year?
In my opinion, it would color it in a similar fashion to how you would interpret it from a natal analysis. I typically don't put too much weight unless that is the chart ruler, to be honest with you, or if the sun answers to it. But outside of that, I think that there's not much to say in regards to that Mercury being retrograde. However, that Mercury is at 7 degrees of Taurus. Let's talk about eclipses once again for a second, right?
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
October 28th eclipse, I'm
Yes.
going to be very interested, because take a look at the houses that Mercury rules in this chart. It's the 5th house of children, romance, and creative self-expression. And then we have the 8th house, which has a lot to do with the ways in which you're kind of enmeshed with other people. It has to do with debts. It has to do with just sort of the ways in which you're wrapped up and you're not individuated. So I'm very interested to kind of see what that eclipse catalyzes, especially given the fact that this is a year of expansion for you. You highlighted the fact that Jupiter is going to be conjunct your natal ascendant, and that is an example of a solar return placement being on a natal angle, that's like pew, pew, pew. That's like where the strobe lights are going off, kind of. So of those 3 overlays, of course, they're all important, but that Jupiter on the ascendant is like the one, in my opinion, to pay attention to. And I'm very excited. It's Jupiter in Aries, like we're dealing with like very much a me and growing me, prioritizing me kind of year, which is really cool.
Right. That's right. Yes. It's so funny because I was tracking Jupiter on my ascendant in my life history, because I'm going to be 49. So I've had several of those cycles, and every single one of those cycles, except for this one, because Jupiter's on my ascendant right now. So every single one of them, just like traditional astrology books tell you, I gained weight. I was pregnant for one of them, so I gained a lot of weight. That was real Jupiter, but I was expanded physically. It was a physical expansion. Now, this one, what's counteracting it is the fact that I have Uranus conjunct the sun. And so that's, stimulating and doing all sorts of, but I thought it was so interesting that, Jupiter's right there. This is the first time in my life that I've had a Jupiter ascendant cycle, and I actually lost weight. I I didn't gain weight. So cool. I'm happy about that. But anyway, all right. So I hope that this demonstrated some fun, some fun insights into the solar return chart and how to work with it, how to use it. Play, guys, play with your charts, play with your astrology. This is all fun stuff. So, any parting words of wisdom that you have?
Yeah, you talk about going back into your history and thinking about those, regardless of your age, there are life events that you can pull out of, like, I would love to analyze, like, did my solar return chart call that out and what significations might have been there. So I think a really great exercise following, taking a listen to this would be to, play, like you said, and go back in your history and, really, really study those charts.
Yeah, for sure. So, oh my gosh, this is so fun. Lars, you're definitely coming back. I love talking to you I love talking shop with you.
Same. This
You
has been
are
a pleasure.
awesome.
Thank you so
Uh,
much.
so for those of you watching, I actually years ago I did do an episode on my audio podcast on the solar return chart with astrologer Anne Orderly. So I'm going to link that in the description box in case anybody wants to go back to 2019 and listen to another astrologer talk about solar return energy. And I will also link in the description box Lars's website and all his contact information. Highly recommend you contact him for a session. He has such a unique perspective. He is very skilled, very good at consulting and talking to people. And what would you say your biggest strength as an astrologer is, and what you really would hope to bring to a client in your practice?
For sure. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. I think I call myself the Al Roker of astrology. I'm like a weatherman, and I empower my clients to sort of figure out what jacket they might need to wear for the weather of the year, right? It's up to them. So I'm definitely an empowering astrologer. Because of my certifications and my study, I do come from a very mathematical lens and sort of a very like a lens of, well, this is what the geometry of your chart is showing. So how are you going to work with this? If you really kind of want to understand the science essentially behind the chart and really understanding how you can work with that weather for the year, that is where I come into play for sure.
Awesome. Well, listen, if you want your weather report, Lars is your man. That's for sure. So, guys, thank you all for watching and tuning in. So, this podcast, I'm thinking, is going to be probably a twice a month event. I think I could commit to that realistically. The reception has been great. You guys obviously want this content, so I'm going to do my best to bring it to you. I always have, there's a roster of phenomenal astrologers and other metaphysicians that I could always bring on as guests. And my next guest for the next podcast is going to be the incredible, legendary Armand Diaz. I will wait and you'll find out what the topic is going to be next time you're tuning into the podcast, but it is very juicy and very interesting. So I am sure that you're not going to want to miss that podcast. And Lars, thank you so much for joining us. I love you. I cannot wait to hug you in person again and see you and have a great meal of something with you because that's what we always do.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great rest of your day, guys, and thank you for tuning in. Take care. Bye-bye.